Hi, everybody. I'm Ryan McNeil. This is the Builder by Day podcast. Today, I'm having a conversation with local realtor Andrew Stevens. Andrew also has his own YouTube channel at Andrew Stevens, where he presents and discusses information regarding the Halifax real estate market. Did I summarize that close enough?
Yeah, that's pretty much nail on the head. So I guess first off, thanks for having me. Happy to chop it up about some stuff that I know at least a little bit about.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, so I have a YouTube channel, talk about the Halifax real estate market, kind of buyer seller tips, what's happening in the market, announcements, new regulation changes, stuff like that. So obviously over the last 5 years, there's been a lot to talk about. I started that 3 years ago, so kind of picking up some steam now and getting a little bit more traction. But no, I've really enjoyed it. It's been fun kind of sharing my thoughts. And one of the things I like about it the most is it keeps me in tune with what's going on. And like, it almost makes me a better realtor, I feel, because I'm more in tune with everything going on because I'm constantly talking about it.
Of course, yeah. So you've been a realtor for 10 years or so?
So I've been 10 years. So I'm second generation realtor. My father, Sterling, was a longtime agent and is now a broker as well. And I'm also a brokerage owner. Me and him own our brokerage together. I just bought into that a year and a half ago. So kind of a new angle at it. So ownership side, a real estate side, kind of all different angles.
Let's talk a little bit more about your YouTube channel. I think that's very interesting. That's how you and I haven't crossed paths on the real estate front.
Yep.
I don't believe we've built a home for any clients that you've had or anything in the past.
No, we've definitely had discussions and just never got there for one reason or another.
We'll zero in on the YouTube channel for now. It's grown quite a bit, obviously, over the last few years. You got a good following there now. I just became aware of it recently because I only, in recent months, started sort of looking around to see what's going on in the surrounding Halifax, Nova Scotia area when it comes to YouTube channels and podcasts and who can I chat with. But it's great, man. I've watched a number of your videos. You're laying out the statistics for folks and giving them some advice. So I assume you're enjoying it?
Yeah, definitely enjoying it. I think a big reason I started it was obviously to try to get more clients. That was a huge reason. But I think another reason is I'm a big believer in transparency in the industry. And I don't necessarily think that the mainstream media is always telling the full story, right? So they might take 1 month of data that somebody who is not a realtor pulled from, CMHC statistics or CREA statistics or something like that. And, the headline is this big scary thing like, oh, sales are down, whatever percentage, but it's like, it's only 1 month of data and year to date, they're actually up or whatever that might be. Right. Yeah. So I'm a big believer in transparency in the industry. I think that consumers want, more info. They want it quickly and they want it to be accurate. So I think, oftentimes behind those mainstream media headlines, there's a lot more to the story. And then also, taking the stats and relating them to people that, a typical member of the public can understand, right? So it's not just, here's the stats, hammering them with all these stats and all these weird phrases that only realtors or builders would know something about. It's about, laying it all out and then talking about, so what's this mean for you if you're looking to buy a home or if you're looking to sell a home? And, as you know, those things are very different now depending on the price point or what location and all that. So I just feel like a lot of times the mainstream stuff is just one big comment about the market as a whole, but within the HRM, there's a lot of different kind of micro markets that are really going to determine what your experience is like when you're buying or selling a home or building a home for that matter.
Yeah. That's good. I appreciate that approach that you're taking there because you're 100% correct, and I'm on board with what you're saying there. And I've approached that same topic a few times in the short period of time that I've been running this podcast with a few different guests that I've had here. I had a conversation with Kevin about some development related things and how it pertains to permits and timelines and so on. And you're correct, and I think that's probably the thing that many people I would guess, appreciate most about your approach is that it's one thing to say last month there were this many sales and, the percentage increase or the average price of a home is now X and average prices, for instance, is very difficult to get a gauge on. I mean, what does that even mean, right? The average. 100%. So if the average price of a home right now in HRM is, it's got to be somewhere in the 500,000, right? Yeah. But what does that really mean, right? What does the average price is 500,000? As just like you said, there are communities all over the place. The price ranges within each community obviously ranges significantly. And also HRM is a pretty diverse pretty widespread area and quite a number of diverse communities. I mean, you have everything from traditional trailer parks within that to the highest of high-end communities in the province.
Yep,
right?
absolutely.
So the average is I mean, I guess there's something to be said that, perhaps you could gauge it to see if it's constantly moving upward, which of course it always is, or how much it may move up over a period of time. But I've tried to have I've taken a similar approach in my conversations here to try to be transparent from a builder's perspective and a developer's perspective. When there's all this talk at the mainstream media and the politicians and so on that come forth and say, we're doing these things, we're removing these barriers, we're spending money here, we're spending money there, but how does that actually translate to what's happening here on the ground?
Yep.
And in our world, from a builder-developer perspective, it hasn't translated at all.
Yeah.
Right? It just has had zero impact in how quickly we are able to get things approved and get permits approved and development agreements approved and ultimately get houses built.
Yeah.
And, truthfully, man, part of the motivation why I have those conversations with people is because I'm in the know. So I'm trying to share the information that I have. Same thing that you're doing. You're out there doing it every day. So here are the stats, but here's the truth. Those two things can somewhat they can be the same, but like if you pull any stat out and isolate it by itself, it doesn't paint the whole picture.
Yeah.
And I've been trying to do the same thing from a builder's perspective. I don't pay as close attention to the stats. I actually don't pay a huge amount of attention to the statistics when it comes to home building. I like to keep a gauge on how many units we're building and as a whole. But I more so would just like everyone to know the real information so that we can all make informed decisions. And if there are things to be addressed, like, for instance, the need for more housing, then let's not all be out there working under the assumption that the only reason we don't have it is because the builders can't get it built, because that is 100% false.
Yep.
It's false.
But that's the narrative.
That's right.
Right.
But we could be building hundreds, and I don't mean just we as in me, I mean we as an industry.
Yep.
We could be building thousands of small, affordable units every year if the municipalities and provinces and so on would just get out of the way.
Yeah, and so the interesting thing, and another reason that I try to put it out there as transparently as possible, and like what's happening and what this means for you is, so a couple examples would be oftentimes you get people in the comments and they're saying, oh, the market's headed for a crash or whatever, and it's like, well, since 1980, the average price year over year in HRM has gone down one time, and it was in 1995. Mm-hmm. We've been through a lot in that time frame.
Right.
Interest rate differences, 08, that whole situation. And, and on top of that, the blame is often put in the wrong spot, right? So what I've seen a lot in the narratives recently online within the comment section, within Reddit and all these places is like, the greedy developers, right? It's like, well, these greedy developers, they want $3,000 for a 2-bedroom apartment.
Well,
but who's really to blame?
Yeah, and hold on to that point, but I agree with you 100%. That always pisses me off, and not because I'm a developer, but because it's just simply not true. Yep. And what's worse is not even just in the media, quote unquote, but leaders of political parties stand up and say those same things.
Yes,
it's wildly ignorant to say that,
yep.
And obviously they're doing it for a reason, but it's just simply not true.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and I don't know the exact numbers, but like, if one of the big developers, like one of the big 3 or 4 around the city that is building most of these apartment buildings, if they're building an apartment building in the north end of Halifax, like what percentage of their total cost comes down to water hookups and sewer and all these stupid fees when we need housing more than ever before? And I just feel like a lot of times when there's certain initiatives talked about or certain things they're going to do, right? They're going to speed up the permit process. Okay, great. So they say that, open forum for everybody to see it, and you never hear about it again.
That's right.
So why do we never hear about it again? Is it because nothing ever happened with it? Is it because the changes were made, but it hasn't actually made a difference on the ground level? Like there's so many different things that are kind of unknown, but I think oftentimes the blame is just put in the wrong direction, right? Yeah. Which to me as an industry member, I wouldn't necessarily say it frustrates me, but it does to a certain extent because I'm like, I wish more people understood the whole picture of this, the whole realm of this.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I wish more people understood the whole picture of everything.
Yeah.
Whether it's real estate related, grocery prices, fuel prices, inflation in general. The average person isn't just going through life with this abundance of knowledge of all these things they have no experience with.
100%.
But now we live in a world where through this endless access to media that we have, and even in things like this, just two local people shooting shit, the information is out there. You can zero in. You can find information locally. You can find people in your own city or town trying to put forth, as much information as possible. And then you have people at the national level doing the same thing. But the information is out there. I just find it so interesting why people still choose to, where they get their information and who they choose to take that information from and who they choose to ignore. It's amazing to me.
Yeah, 100%.
Right? I mean, I'm like anybody. You might stumble upon somebody that's sharing some information, and then you think, geez, this person seems to know what they're talking about. So you follow them or pay a little more attention to them. But for me, it's always the substance of what they're saying. I mean, I don't care what they look like or how they present them. That all helps, because there is a presentation component to it when it comes to any of this form of media stuff, right? How well spoken the person might be, and
this could be the best podcast on the planet, but if it doesn't look great, people might not watch it in the first place. Is the reality, right? If it's not packaged with the right thumbnail and the right titles and the right look with the set and all that, it does play a factor.
So you try to present everything as nice as you can, as appealing as you can, but ultimately it's the substance that we should be seeking, and I'd like to think in most cases that's what it boils down to. But if you and I were sitting in a empty room with fluorescent lights overhead and shitty microphones that don't sound good and all of those things, undoubtedly some people would just move on to the next clip.
Yeah, and it's one thing for Joe Rogan to do that. He already has an audience, right? Or
he's also sitting down with the president of the United States and famous celebrities.
Exactly.
So on,
like he could do whatever he wanted at this point. But you can't do that when you're trying to start out.
Of course not.
Build your following.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's interesting. Your channel looks good. Do you shoot that? Is that at home? Is that in your home office?
Most of it now is in my office in Burnside. Yeah.
Okay.
So I just have like a dedicated. It's in my office. It's all just hooked into my computer, and I go in, turn the lights on, and go.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. And you do your own editing for the most part.
For the most part, yeah. Any of the talking head educational videos, yes. Anything me walking around the city, I have a guy that shoots it for me.
Okay. Yeah. And so, how do you come up with your content? How do you determine what it is you want to speak about? How often do you produce a video? Is it like once a week or?
Minimum once a week. Okay. Right. Lately, I've been doing 2 a week just because it's a little bit of a slower time of year.
Sure.
Even though I'm busier in January now than I've probably ever been. But the way I determine it, honestly, is I try to think about what my audience is looking for. And that's, I think, where it took a spin and started to really take off was when I stopped making the videos that I wanted to make and I started making the ones that I thought my audience would be interested in. So done a lot of work on the back end with analytics and stuff like that. In like a mastermind group with some guys all across Canada that are a lot bigger in the YouTube space than I am. So I've learned a lot from them. But yeah, I basically have kind of some different buckets that I look at and some different titling type stuff that I do and kind of focus on it from that. But it's a mix of news, market knowledge, announcements, regulations, and then just standard kind of buyer and seller tips.
And so when you're discussing things and you're pulling facts and information, are you using, are you sort of scouring for that, or do you have sort of your go-to places where you're generally pulling your information from? And
it depends what the topic is. Like a lot of the stuff that I do, I would pull right from Stats Canada. Some would be from CMHC. Some would be just from our local, like MLS statistics as well. And then usually most of it's like backed up with like news headlines and news stories and stuff like that as well. So I always try to tie it back into, reality, what's really happening, not just like the theory of, here's the stats, but what's that really causing on the ground level, right? So for example, something that kind of happened recently, I've been hearing a lot about like softening rents in Halifax.
Right.
Again, that was from like a rental report that came from this website that does them every month all across Canada. And it's like, well, it doesn't really tell the whole picture because sure, there might be a softening of rents for a 2-bedroom unit that's $3,000 a month because there's a lot of inventory hitting the market kind of all, at the same time. But let's face it, if you're trying to find a 2-bedroom apartment in Halifax for $1,800 or below, which would be considered more of like an affordable range, which is crazy to even say when you think of what it was 5 years ago. But, now you're still not going to be able to, like, you're not going to be able to find that. Like the vacancy rate at that level would be basically zero, right? So maybe there's a softening of rents. Sure. Are we headed towards a more balanced rental market? Maybe. Do I think that that's going to happen this year? No, I don't. Do I think it could happen in 5 to 10 years from now if some things happen that we talked about earlier, like permits and all these kinds of things? Yeah, maybe, but it's going to take a lot, right? They've already decreased the immigration numbers, so that's another thing that is going to affect this year. A lot of economical and political question marks is going to affect our market here.
For sure.
So there's a lot of things happening this year that to me makes 2025 a pretty interesting year to kind of predict and to think about looking back on it in a year from now. Yeah,
you're right. And what happens is, when you have things like, well, essentially this utter gong show of government debacle that we have going on here. I mean, it's a disaster.
Yep.
I mean, there's no other way to describe it. You don't have to be a political expert, and it doesn't matter to me what team you're on and whether you're liberal, conservative, that doesn't matter. But this is a disaster at the moment. We have no government. We have no leadership whatsoever.
Yeah.
And those who are pretending to be the leaders are woefully incompetent. I mean, that's how we got to this point.
Yep.
And so, the real estate market doesn't like uncertainty.
Exactly.
Because developers don't like uncertainty. And builders don't like uncertainty.
Yep.
And when things are uncertain, we all clam up.
Yeah.
Right? We all put our hands in our pockets and we go, I think I'll see where this is going before I start jamming more foundations in the ground.
Yeah.
And new construction drives every real estate market. It doesn't matter where you live. If there's new construction is what pulls everything along. Yeah. And that's what they're always talking about. When you talk stats and we talk new builds and population increase versus number of new units and all, that's all new construction related. Yeah. And the uncertainty is not good. Yeah. Regardless of where it goes, there's lots of speculation, and we could all speculate as to, are there going to be tariffs? Is it going to happen? What's it going to be? What's the result going to be? I mean, at the end of the day, the result is, if that does happen, the result is going to be negative.
Absolutely.
We just don't know how negative it's going to be, right? And none of us know. That's kind of like when people speculate, you alluded to it earlier, where people might speculate where the real estate market is going. Nobody knows that.
No, well, right? And that's the hilarious part for me, right? Is like, so I do a predictions video every year, and to be honest, a lot of it is for my own entertainment to look back on it. Sure. And last year I was like 4 for 5. I was like, I did pretty good. It's a miracle, right? But in some other years I've been way off. But here's the reality: right before the pandemic, or when the pandemic was kind of getting going, like all the world economists were wrong.
Right.
That they literally get paid to forecast that, and they were wrong. Like all these like chief economists at the banks and all that, like none of them said, our housing prices were going to double in 3 years, right?
That's right?
Like none of them said that.
That's
so
right.
It's just funny when, people can bash that all they want, but at the end of the day, nobody knows where it's going. I don't care what your job is. Everybody's going to have their own opinion, and that's fine, but nobody knows how 2025 is going to shape up until we get to December 31st. That's right. Realistically.
And especially, nobody knows where the real estate market is going to go and how it's going to react.
Yeah.
Of course. I mean, you could look at trends and you can look at historical information and how it compares to what's going on now. But again, with this level of uncertainty, certainly nobody knows what's going to happen with the real estate market.
Yeah.
And when things are uncertain, people slow it down. I've spoken to a number of home builders and developers recently in the last few weeks, and of course, this conversation around, the new the Trump administration in the U.S. and this gong show that we have going on here with the Liberal Party, and so, but we're all on the same page. None of us are political experts, but we're all looking at each other and saying the same thing, which is, we might just pull the reins in for a minute until we see what's going to take place, and it's probably going to be until sometime after we have an election before we'll have any sense of where that goes, because even when you talk about, especially the larger developers who are building hundreds of units at a time, they might be starting apartment buildings with hundreds of units. They're not going to do that not knowing what's coming down the road, right? They, especially in the last few years, they dealt with COVID, and they dealt with almost an overnight increase of interest rates. You start a $20 million apartment building, and you think you're borrowing money at 2% or 2.5% or 3%, and then you're borrowing at 6%.
Yeah.
And that entire project could be upside down financially before you even finish it.
Yeah, and 2 points on an interest rate at a $30 million build is a big difference,
Yes,
right?
it's huge.
It's not like a
It's huge,
$200,000
Exactly.
home that you're building. It's big money, right?
That's right.
It changes the whole game.
That's right.
And that's the reality, right? So it's like back to the high rent thing. It's like, well, why are the rents high, right? And it's a pretty easy answer. It's because it costs a lot of money to build. Like these developers aren't all of a sudden, doubling their profit margin. It has nothing to do with that. It's probably the same. It might even be worse. I don't know what those numbers look like, but something I want to ask you this because something I've never really understood, and I'm curious. I have some ideas, but it might take me a minute to get this out. But I'm going somewhere.
Yeah, sure.
With this.
Take your time.
I'm going to use so talking about new builds houses, okay, residential homes. I'm going to use the parks of Lake Charles as an example. Let's say in there they're building all these detached homes. Let's call them 2,400 square feet to make the math easy at $6,999, so $700,000. These homes sit on lots that are 5,000 square feet, right? And let's say they're going to build 5,000 of them, just for argument's sake. I think the big disconnect from me, from a realtor perspective with new construction, is the lack of, it's not the necessarily lack of homes that are being built, it's the lack of affordable homes being built. And when I think back to what are some stuff they were building 20, 25, 30 years ago? I think of places like Lower Sackville, Cole Harbor. I think about Eastern Passage, like the semis with a split level with the bedrooms in the basement. Back then, I don't know what they were, 69.9 or 59.9, something like that, right? So my point is this. They're building these homes, 2,400 square feet, 4 bed, 3.5 bath, beautiful finishes. They're nice houses, right? On 5,000 square foot lots, and they're selling them for $700,000. Okay. Why is it that we can't cut that lot in half and can basically cut the house in half and do townhomes, for example, on a slab, maybe on a slab, 1,200 square feet, 2 bed, 1 bath, or 3 bed, 1 bath with maybe not stone countertops, yada, yada, yada. And we list those for $399,900. And I guess my point is, in theory, if the build costs are the same and everything, and this is like assuming the land costs are the same,
Sure,
and assuming the cost per square foot to build is the same, which I'm guessing is the disconnect. Why is that not possible? And why isn't that happening more? Because to me, that's the biggest need in the market right now. And like, to me, if I took a new construction subdivision on like that, I feel like I could sell 500 of those in a weekend if they were priced at, if they were basically a Governor's Brook type style home. But even you could even shrink it up a little bit more than that. I'm talking pretty baseline here. So I'm just curious, like, why isn't that happening and why is it not able to happen? Does it have to do with, like, when you shrink it down, the cost to build per square foot doesn't work the same way, or what is that?
It's a good question. And I'm with you. I'm with you 100% on the fact that we as an industry, it would be quite helpful for this housing crisis if we just could I shouldn't say would, if we could build highly affordable homes.
Yeah.
That could be for sale for, like you said, $399. Let's go with that price range.
Or even $499.
Yeah,
like
even the average home
less
price.
than
Let's say 500,000 for argument's sake. I guess there would be a number of reasons why that's not happening. First and foremost, the thing we have to realize is that there is one developer in this city that the last time I checked, I believe they own something like 80% of the serviceable land in the HRM boundary.
Yeah.
So one developer, for all intents and purposes, controls all the development.
Yeah.
And I can also tell you that developer, because I've worked with them, they're like any other business, and they are going to make decisions on what is the most profitable thing for their shareholders.
Yeah.
And they do actually build some smaller, affordable rental stuff, lower end stuff in some of the communities, not in the one you mentioned, but out in, it's called Mount Hope.
Yeah. That would be a good example of kind of like my thought about like a suggestion, I guess.
Right.
But they're going to be rentals, but that's fine. It's still creating affordable housing in theory.
And one reason for that would be if you think about this from a realtor's perspective.
Yeah.
If I built a house right here next door.
Yeah.
And the price was $499.
Yeah.
And you shut up and it's one house on a little country lot, because we're not in the city here. We're in the woods, right?
Yeah.
So if I build a little house next door and it's $499 and you show up and it's what you just described, it's it's 1,200 square feet on a slab or 1,300 square feet on a slab or a little 1,000 square foot baby split, whatever it might be, something that you've described there. And it has very basic finishes. You would build basically an apartment grade style finish in a house.
Yep.
So I would flip it back around to you and say, if I built that next door and you bring your clients to it and you walk, it's new construction, and you pull up to it and it's just basic vinyl siding, the cheap stuff, right? Basic windows and doors. You go inside and it's basic laminate flooring, carpeted staircase, laminate countertops, 8-foot ceilings, one light fixture in each room, no pot lights, no under cabinet lights, no pull-out recycle centers in the kitchen, none of those upgrades that you have. And your clients walk around in it. Are they going to want it? Or are they going to say, where's the quartz countertop? This is new construction, right? Where's the hardwood staircase? And so I guess what I'm getting at is your question is valid. And I say the same, I've said the same thing for many, many years.
Yeah.
I think the short answer to why it is that doesn't exist is because here in Nova Scotia, we grossly overbuild all of the homes that we build as an industry. We overbuild everything, right? Because here's my theory on why that happens. And why it has become more of a problem in the last 25 years than it was before that. Because 25 years ago, you could go into places like Sackville and Eastern Passage and Dartmouth and so on. You could buy a little semi that was $89,900. And it was exactly what we just described. It was what you talked about, 1,200 square feet, 2 bedrooms up, 1 bedroom down, whatever. But we overbuild it because here in Nova Scotia and specifically in HRM, there are, 1 or 2 or 3 larger builders that would do, they might do north of 100 units. So I'm talking single family builds. They might do more than 100. But I don't know that anyone would be doing even 200. And I doubt that anyone's there. Right? And then even some of the larger builders that would be considered, I kind of put myself in the middle of the pack volume wise. We'll do anywhere from, there could be years where we might only close 12 or 15 houses, and then there might be another year we do 24, and it's somewhere in there. But we're a custom home builder, and we build larger homes, and they take longer to build, and our process takes longer because our customers are very involved in the process, so we kind of move with their pace. But here in the industry as a whole, the new construction industry it's wildly competitive. But when you do the math on it, you go, well, hold on a sec. If the busiest home builder in the province only builds 100 and some odd houses. And as an industry, you build 5,000. Then that's pretty diluted across all of the builders. We're all fighting for the same clients. And literally, when you go into these subdivisions, you can see it. I've seen it many times over the years. Myself and 4 other builders are building in whatever community. Somebody comes in on a weekend with a realtor like yourself, and you're doing a little home hunting. You're doing a once around the community. You're going to go to every builder's house. You're going to show them everything that's on the market.
Which one do I like the most? What's the baseline package?
That's right.
Based on the price.
And then it's going to be, okay, well, we got 3 houses. They're all on the same street. They're all 2 stories, 2,200 square feet, 3 bedrooms up, 2 bedrooms down, finished the same way. Essentially the same house. We're all buying our material from essentially the same suppliers. It comes down to oftentimes, quite literally, which people do you want to deal with? Which home builder would you actually like to spend time dealing with? And sometimes when the houses are already built and they're sitting there and a realtor's going up and down the street showing them, that deal might come down to which builder's going to throw in some kitchen appliances.
100%.
Right?
100%.
So they ignore everything else. Nobody's asking, I shouldn't say nobody, but very rarely are people asking anything about what's behind the drywall.
People literally care about how they feel when they're standing in the kitchen and living room and the primary bathroom or primary suite.
That's right.
And ensuite, right? Like that's literally pretty much it.
That's right. So
it's
as an
no
industry,
different than flips. Like people look at those and they will go buy one of those, and I'm like, this is one of the worst. I actually made a video that was like, never buy flips. Like don't ever buy it. Other than there's the odd exception. But,
basically we find ourselves in a scenario as builders where we're all building essentially the same homes. If you're in these communities, because there are covenants and design guidelines and so on, and each lot. As you go up and down the street, these lots on this side of the street are for 40-foot wide, 2-story homes. So that's what they're all going to be. There's not going to be any variance there. So we're all building essentially the same homes. And then people walk in and we're trying to win the aesthetics race.
Yeah.
Right? When they walk, we're trying to win that. Just what you said.
Yeah.
We're trying to convince them this is the house for them based on what they see and feel and touch when they get inside. Because we're all building it to the same building code.
Yep.
And then when they walk inside, it becomes the countertop challenge, right? Or the flooring, or the, it could be little things. It could be even light fixtures. It can come down to little things like that, which brings us back to why we as an industry overbuild everything.
Yeah.
Because we're just, it's so competitive.
Yeah.
That when we're in these communities, the builders are generally buying lots from the developers.
Yep.
And the builders are then building their homes and competing for the same buyers.
Yep.
Whereas if you go to other provinces or larger city centers, you'll see some of these larger builders that are building thousands of units a year.
Yeah.
And they control all of the product because it's their community. So you go into whatever subdivision or community that is, there's only one builder. Oftentimes.
Yeah.
Maybe two. But if there's two, they're often working together anyway. Yeah. But you walk in there and it's like, it's one builder. So there's none of this playing one off the other and who's going to throw in a dishwasher.
Yeah. If you want to live in this subdivision, you're building with this builder. It's just a matter of what you're going to build. Yeah.
That's right. And so when you do that, the advantage to that is, the advantage to everybody to that is, then you can actually do the things that you said. Then a developer could say, you know what, we're going to take, might not even be the whole subdivision.
Yep.
It might be, we're going to take this phase 2, or even this street is going to be 1,200 square foot on a slab, highly affordable, maybe a different set of design guidelines to keep that price down. And we can do that because we're targeting a certain buyer there. And we don't have to worry about the other builder across the street doing something wildly different. And now it doesn't look right.
And I get that for sure. And it would have to be the same community realistically to make it work, right? It would have to be like an affordable subdivision or an affordable area.
Right.
I
we need those. We definitely need those. But the other reason that you don't, and the other thing is, by far, without question, the place where we can build the most affordable units. I don't mean the most volume. Oh, I do. I mean the most volume-wise, but I also mean the most as in those that are the lowest price, the most affordable, will be outside the city limits. Yeah. It'll be on unserviced land where the developer or landowner can, as efficiently as possible, maximize the number of units on that lot, make them small, put them close together, share wells, share septics. There's things that can be done. Yeah. And then we'll come back to what we started about 30 minutes ago, where we're going to run into the bureaucracy machine. Yeah. And it's not going to happen. Yeah. That's just how it is, right? Yeah. I could build. Again, I'm a builder out here doing, 18, 20 houses a year, usually custom. I could build 50,000 square foot affordable units tomorrow. I have the land to do it. And I have the ability to do it. And we could be selling people houses for $399. No problem. Or we could be renting them, 2-bedroom homes that people could rent for $1,500 a month or whatever it is. They would definitely be more affordable than their options that are currently available. Yep. But we cannot get the approvals to do it. We have the hundreds and hundreds and thousands of acres of land to do it. Yep. We just can't get the approvals to do it.
Interesting.
Right? There's a community down in Musquodoboit Harbor. I'm from Jador, so that was my stomping ground, was down in that area, and it caught my eye. It was in the news earlier this week or last week, where there's a company down there or individual who had purchased some land, and it's right in the village, right in the heart of Musquodoboit Harbor, and they're trying to do some development. And part of that development is the current seniors assisted living complex. It's referred to as a Birches. They want to move it or rebuild it, whatever, in this new site. Great idea. Awesome. But part of making that happen, from what I understand from their perspective, is they got to do the whole thing. They can't just put that one unit up. They need to build the roads and build all the other smaller affordable units. Yep. And they're trying to do that, but they estimate that they're looking at somewhere between 5 to 7 years to get the approval to do it. So the project is
just to get the approval.
Just to get the approvals.
Yeah.
Then however many more years to build it out. So let's just say, for argument's sake, it's a decade from now before these products are available, these homes are available. Yeah. And not because this individual doesn't want to do it or doesn't have the means to do it, but they just can't get the approvals or permits. Yep. Right.
Which is that's a whole other segment of the market that's in a scary spot right now to me, is like the senior housing situation here. And there's been a push lately with some big buildings going up and stuff, but let's face it, we have an aging population.
That's right.
It's only going to continue to age.
Right.
can't stop that from happening.
That's
So
right.
it's like, and if I look at, let's use my mother as an example, was a nurse for 40 years. She has what I would consider to be a great pension.
Mm-hmm.
It's not as great as it once was.
Right.
Because of the way the world's gone, right? And the cost of living and everything else. So,
I mean, I have family members in this situation. If you're living on a fixed income and you're 75 years old and you get $1,600 a month to live on,
yep.
that's not much if you're living in a single, a one-bedroom apartment by yourself and your rent is $1,500.
Yep.
You do the math on that, that doesn't work.
Yep.
And, not everybody has a pension.
Yep.
They get, old age pension or
yep.
CPP or whatever they call that. But not everybody has a government pension or a pension from a company that they worked for they're able to top up and make that difference. So, yeah, there is certainly there's a certain percentage of the population that they feel doom and gloom because they don't feel like they'll ever own a home. So the young folks are, and that's a shame because that's what the media tells them. That's what society tells them. And I've probably even said that, alluded to that, but it's not accurate.
Yeah.
Right? You definitely can own a home. It's going to be difficult perhaps, and the barriers to entry might be more difficult for those folks than they were for the Gen Xers or the baby boomers.
Absolutely.
But don't give up on it.
Yeah.
Right? You just have to sit down, put together a plan and do it. But when you're on the other end of that spectrum and you're 65, 70, 75 years old and you can't work anymore, then you're in a whole different scenario because you can't control your own destiny that way. You can't go get a second part-time job or put your head down and work hard and work for that raise or that promotion. They don't have that option. They only have what they have. And the young folks are, the first-time homebuyers who would like to be first-time homebuyers. They face certain challenges to get into the market.
Yep.
And then you have the folks who, the older crowd who they're particularly vulnerable because of their financial situation.
Yep.
And that downward pressure that they constantly get every time they go to the grocery store or wherever it is it's a shame. We're going to have to do something about it as a society. Because we're not going to, we can't have that. You look at the homeless situation around us and I've lived here my whole life. And, I went to the university here at St. Mary's and so 25 years ago, the city looked entirely different than it looks now. Yep. And there were homeless people, but you could count on one hand how many there were, it seemed. And, I actually used to interact with them a little bit because I pulled a rickshaw around Halifax years ago and we'd be out in the evenings and there'd be, those handful of homeless people who were out there in the city. Yep. But there weren't tent encampments. There weren't pallet shelters. There weren't these fenced-in communities off the side of the road with whatever it is these days that's going on within that community. This is a problem.
Big time.
That I think a lot of what happens there is that we get so distracted with, at the national level, we get so distracted with talking about the politics of it, and the liberals say this and the conservatives say that, and that's just horseshit. The reality is right here around us. Yep. Just look out the window as you're driving to and from all around the city, and more homeless people, more and more tents, more pallet shelters, more whatever. It's the problem, the solution, the cause of the problem is multifaceted.
Right? It's a very complex problem.
Very complex problem.
Yeah.
But we're feeling it and we're going to see it right here in our communities. And it's only going to get worse. There is nothing happening that is going to change this.
I agree. And
nobody's doing anything that's going to change this.
I agree. And they're taking some small steps and, it's nice to see them doing something. But I like what they did in Lower Sackville from a general point of view. They did the tiny home kind of village community there, but they put supports in place to try to, to me, that should be transitional. It shouldn't be the be all end all. I'm going to live here forever. It should be, let's try to get these people back on their feet. Right. And there's a million reasons why somebody could go there and there's no point to judge them or whatever. It's just is the reality of it. But
I agree
at the same time.
Yeah. And I agree. We're going to need more of, and small communities like that, purpose built communities like that is what we're going to need.
Yes.
I don't know that one's physically in the right location, mind you.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
And also, the biggest problem I have with that one is the math. That money should go a lot further than it went. They're turning to the one company that they've decided they're going to deal with for everything. Yeah. And they just go, let us know what we owe you.
Let's do it.
Yeah. You guys go ahead, let us know what we owe you. Yeah. That's not how business operates.
And it's like, why wouldn't that go to tender?
That's right.
Just throwing that out there.
That's right.
So here's again, like, you know, we're talking about where the blame goes and all this, right? The province built no public housing for 30 years.
Correct.
Yet it's the developer's fault that there's no affordable housing, right? And here we are. Like, I don't understand how that happened. Like, first of all, I don't understand how that happened. Second of all, I don't understand why. Like, obviously the private sector has to be involved, or else it's never going to get the wheels to turn fast enough. But at the end of the day, you know, the province is screaming for housing, is the be all end all. I don't care whose fault it is. I don't care how we got here. But right now, we need more housing, specifically affordable housing. But we need all housing, but especially affordable housing. Yet the province doesn't build anything. Like, the province has all kinds of land. The municipalities have all kinds of land. They have all kinds of money, at least based on what I pay on my property tax bill every year and all the deed transfer tax that we do on all these sales and all the other taxes, right? So why don't they build a building? And why don't they staff it? And why don't they manage it and put it out to tender and let everybody fight over who's going to build it and try to get it for the least amount of money built? Like, but instead we're spending, I don't know, $20 million on a pool in the Commons. And I'm not saying I don't like that. Obviously I do. I live in Halifax. I think it's a great feature to the Commons, but there's so many things we're spending $30 million on. Yeah. And it's like, well, for $30 million, you could probably put up a 50, I don't know the exact math, but you could probably put up a 50 unit building if it was baseline finishes. And then if they hire a property manager for 50 or 60 grand a year to manage it, Bob's your uncle, you've got 50 affordable units, that's right? Like to me, it's not rocket science. And I'm not saying that's the perfect fix, because it is a complex problem. But at the end of the day, like, the province can say what they want, but all these announcements don't mean anything until there's action taken. All these housing starts that keep getting talked about, oh, the housing starts are through the roof. Well, where's the completions to go with it? Yeah, that's right. And the answer is they're lagging behind. And that data also from Stats Canada and CMHC and everything is like a year or two behind, which is frustrating for me because I want to talk about what, like, I have no idea what the completions were last year. I don't know. I think it's trending somewhere in the 6,000 to 8,000 range. I think I saw in the province. I think I saw HRM only issued like 2,800 occupancy permits. Which, like, you know, so here this came out fully finished occupancy permit, like 2,800. Yeah, and here it is, right? So last fall, there was a study that came out. I think it was the Fraser Institute that did it, and it was alarming. Okay, it was like, here's the amount of housing units we're building in our province versus the population growth every year. Yeah. And for us, we were the second widest ratio. We were 8-1. People added versus housing units being built. We were only second to New Brunswick, who was 11-1. Right. And then it goes down significantly. Like, there's somebody else at 6-1. Then it was all like 3-1 or 2-1, like in a reasonable range, right? And so, okay, so we're adding more people than ever. We're building the same amount of homes per year, give or take, in the province, outside of a few outlier years. Mm-hmm. We're building like 4,500-ish houses a year, housing units, that is. And it doesn't take an astronaut to figure out that if you're adding 30,000 people to the province every year and you're only upping the housing units by 4,500, that's not going down a path that's going to have a good result for anybody. You're right. And you think about that, and you, I watched that in one of your, you mentioned that in one of your clips on your channel, and I found it very interesting. I mean, I generally knew what that is, but it's always nice to put some numbers to it. This is where, like you said earlier, if you can, it's one thing, the stats are one thing. It's one thing to say, hey, we built 4,500 units last year. Okay, what's that mean? But what's that mean? Right. What was the population increase? Oh, it was 30,000 plus. Ooh, okay, so if the general rule of thumb is 2.5 people per unit, 4,500 units is like what, 11,250 people that could be housed in those 40. So where are the other 20,000 people? And I mean that literally. I'm saying, I'm looking around and going, I have no idea. Because I know where some of them are, right? And part of the problem is, well, there's a number of problems with that. First and foremost, almost population increase in Nova Scotia in 2023, and I'm sure it's the same in 2024,
or maybe it's 2024 that I'm quoting here. Regardless, it's going to be the same. It won't matter. Population increase is due almost entirely to immigration.
Yeah.
Okay. So that means we have, so in other words, this isn't little babies that folks just have to buy a crib. Oh, the population went up because we had 30,000 babies last year, and so everyone bought a crib and put it in their den.
Yeah.
These are people moving here who need a place to live.
Basically teleporting into place, just like
That's right.
that.
Boom. They immediately need a place to live. And if we assume 2.5 people per unit, and there's 4,500 units, so it's 12,000 people who can be housed, then where are the other 20,000 people per year physically living, right?
Yep.
Now, I know where some of them are living.
Yep.
Because I've built houses in communities for folks where we build the house and then, we deal with 2 people or 1 person builds a house. And then we might go back to do year-end deficiencies or touch-up stuff, and there's a dozen people in the house.
Yeah.
And I've talked to other builders the same thing, and we're building a home for somebody right now, currently today, or working through now designing their home for them, and they're moving from. They live in Halifax in the city, and they live in a very nice community that was, it was a newly built community probably 20 years ago.
Yep.
So these homes are only 20 years old. They're all, at the time, it was one of the higher end communities. It would be like a West Bedford of today. And these folks, great people. They've lived there for years. They put a lot of time and energy and money into the home that they built, and it's on a great street.
Yep.
But part of the reason they're moving is because across the street from them is a 2-story home, that single family home, that has anywhere from, what they told me, anywhere between 15 to 18, even upwards of 20 people living in the home.
Wow. And
it's not just 18 people. It's 18 people, but it's 18 different people. It's like a hotel. It's like a revolving door.
Yeah.
Because these folks are renting rooms or beds or whatever, however they're doing that. But by the day. Yeah. They don't rent by the month.
Yeah.
There's somebody they contact, they need a place to stay. And it's like, these guys are describing it to me. And then I've heard more stories similar to that since then. Yeah. And I can only imagine the same thing, even probably more exaggerated in some of the apartment buildings around the city.
Absolutely.
Where you have a 2-bedroom apartment and there's a dozen people living in there.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a long list of things that are problematic there.
Yep.
Right? Like that should not be.
Yep.
But it's just math. And it's interesting that, that we just laid it out there. And so it's been years of that, and it's going to be more years of that because we only build whatever it might be. Let's just say, for argument's sake, we build 5,000 units a year on average. There's talk of there being, I heard last year them throwing around 8,000. 8,000 units didn't get finished last year. Yep. But let's just say it's 5,000 for argument's sake.
Yep.
And there are
still going backwards.
30,000 people here. And so, we need to be building whatever it is. We need to build 15,000 units a year, and we're only building 5. And so every year, not only are we not keeping up, we're going further and further backwards.
Yep.
Which means every year the demand is grossly outpacing the supply.
Yep.
And that's just simple economics. Like, you don't have to be a...
And as that demand grows, then prices are going to go up. It's and it's just a matter of how much and when. It's not a matter of if, right? And if you look at the housing market, like the resale side of things, the same thing is, it's not like I don't like to see the government doing things and doing initiatives and, trying to make things more affordable. But to me, it seems like most of the things they do are coming from the wrong angle. They're making it easier for people to qualify and literally not doing them a favor, because all that is just taking on more debt by extending AMs out to 30 years, for example, or extending the default insurance up to 1.5 or all these things, right? And it's like, in theory, that's a good thing. Like, I'm happy that more people can afford to get into homes. But at the same time, if those initiatives are just going to have, in a 1 to 3 year period, upward pressure on pricing, well, it's going to kind of cancel each other out anyway. Right. And then you just have all these people, especially people who are like my age or a little bit younger than me, like I'm mid-30s. Then you just have all these like 28-year-olds or 30-year-olds taking on homes that they're just building way more debt than they necessarily should be, right? And that's one thing to say for like your first home, like, okay, well, let's get into the market, let's build some equity, and then let's do something from there. Like, you kind of got to do what you got to do. But the problem is that product's going to be used by a lot more people than just first-time home buyers, right? Because people are at the tip of their budget all the time. I think a really scary number to know would be, it's one thing to say there's, let's call it, I don't know the exact number, it's like 1,200 homeless people on the list right now in Halifax, give or take. I think a really scary number to know would be how many people are basically homeless, but they're just not on the street. They're couch surfing. They're bumping around between friends and family members or whatever that might be.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. How many people are
like a month away from being there?
A dozen of them. Exactly.
Yeah, that would be a scary number to know. And then on top of that, like, and I see it a lot in the media and all this, and I see it a lot online, like people basically berating, homeless people and, oh, they're just drug addicts or whatever. And it's like, it's really not the case. Like, you got people in the media who are nurses that make like 85 grand a year and they can't find a place to live, right? Like, that's a huge problem to me, right? You're always going to have some sort of problem surrounding drugs or life circumstances or past traumas or mental illness or whatever that is. But it's really, it's scary when you have people who are working their tail off that cannot afford to live here. That's really scary, especially on the East Coast of Canada. It's not like we live in New York, right? That's right. So the other scary number that I would never want to know is how many people are, before their next paycheck comes out, working class Nova Scotians, what percentage of people have less than like, call it $1,000 to their name before their paycheck is coming into their account the next day? Because the harsh reality is that people can look at the homeless situation all they want and judge it and all this, but a large percentage of Nova Scotians are 3 to 6 months away from being there themselves at all times.
Right.
Like how long can most people make it if they get laid off from work? And the answer is not that long for most people.
That's right. Yeah.
That's a scary thing to think about.
Of course it is. And so I agree with you. I've thought that before. I've had that conversation before with other people, and it's like, you have that number of people who are homeless. Yeah. That's not, I agree with you. That's a gauge of how badly things are going. Yeah. But that would be like the tip of the iceberg, right? It's but the inverted iceberg, like how much more is about to fall out of the bottom, right? We're just seeing the tip of the iceberg coming down through. But I agree with you. The number would be gross if you're thinking about how many people are, like you say, 3 months from also having nowhere to live. Right?
Oh, it'd be a mind-blowing
because I'm sure you could probably, even how many people right now today are behind on their rent. They're a month behind, or their power bill, or their phone bill, or whatever it is. And as soon as and it's kind of like what we talked about earlier. So, and for these folks, unfortunately, once they fall behind, there's no reason for them to think they're going to get caught up. What's going to happen that you're going to get caught up? Unless you're expecting a raise, or, it's not like your landlord's going to come to you and say, oh, by the way, just good news, I'm dropping your rent $400 next month. That's not going to happen.
Well, and unfortunately for those people who are struggling the most, everything ends up being more expensive, which is hilarious. Like, not hilarious. It's mind blowing to think about. Like, okay, the worse your credit rating is, probably the higher percentages you're paying in interest on pretty much everything, right? Because you're like high risk, right? So maybe you had to use a B lender to get your vehicle and you're paying, 10 points on it instead of 5 to 7 or 4 to 6 or whatever the number would have been. Yeah. You're getting hit with NSF fees. You're like, that's all costing more money. And it's like, the more money you have, the easier it is to get access to cheaper money.
Sure.
And it's almost like that should be backwards in a way, right? Sure, and I get that it's a risk thing based on the bank standards, but what do you think like the housing, from a builder perspective, like what do you think the housing market needs the most right now to like kind of turn the corner and push it in the right direction? And I'm assuming that is coming down to some of the government stuff on the back end with permits and fees and stuff like that. But like more specifically, what do you think, like if you were the mayor of Halifax tomorrow, I know you've had a couple of the candidates on here because I listened to a few of them, like what do you think some like initiatives should be taken that would be, they would actually start to make a difference on the ground level in a reasonable time frame?
Yeah, that's a good question. Let's pretend I'm the premier, since the mayor doesn't really have the power to do anything.
Okay, I like it.
And housing is especially affordable housing or government housing is a provincial initiative, as you mentioned, even though they haven't done anything with it for 30 years.
Yeah.
What I would say is I'm actually not sure why this isn't the approach that they take. I don't quite understand. It's not like they're not willing to spend the money, because they spend money. They've spent tens of millions of dollars on however many projects just in the last few years. So there's money. They're willing to spend the money. Like you mentioned earlier, they have the land.
Yep.
The city has land. The province has land. It's all over the place. I think what the approach should be, and also something you alluded to earlier, which is there's no one answer for everybody.
Yep.
So those who do have substance abuse problems or mental health issues, the solution for them is entirely different from the nurse who
Yes.
just can't find a 2-bedroom apartment, and or whatever that scenario might be, or the family, or the single mom with 2 children, or whatever. Those are totally different solutions.
Absolutely.
They shouldn't be physically in the same location, and they shouldn't be physically the same type of structure, of course. This is where it turns into a political conversation, but I actually think part of the problem is that there's just too much politics in it. There's no party out there, or political party, that's saying, we don't think affordable housing is an issue.
Yep.
Right? Everybody agrees.
Yep.
It's an issue. So, but they're always jockeying for position, right? Like nobody can just come up with a plan. And again, back to what you said earlier about when you're talking about the stats that you share, is there's no transparency. So step number 1 for me would be, let's identify and share with everyone the real information. Listen, everybody, here's the real information. There are this many people currently homeless or unhoused. There is an estimated this many people who are pretty close to being unhoused.
1 degree away, right? Kind of thing.
Or relying on the food bank, or coming occasionally showing up at shelters, or whatever the case may be. So quantify that first. Because you're running a business. So that's the thing that has happened across the board, I think, with politics at every level, is people have forgotten that ultimately what we elect these people to do is to run the business of whatever jurisdiction it is.
It's more about saving
run the
face
business
now.
of the province, right? But it's become like this. I don't know what you'd even call it. But so identify the issue, put numbers to the issue, and then put forth a plan that says, okay, we need whatever it might be. We need 5,000 affordable units per year to be built for the next 10 years to get this thing back on track. And so that's going to cost the Nova Scotia taxpayer X number of dollars. This is how we're going to come up with that money. We're going to have to make some adjustments. We're going to have to make some cuts here and there. You can't just, because what you can't do is go to everybody and say, so for that reason, everyone, your income tax is going up 3%. Or that's not going to work, because then you just put pressure on the same people who are already having trouble trying to trying to cover it. So, but I think the solution physically from a housing perspective needs to be multifaceted. And I think we should be utilizing, there's always this thing where, somebody will propose, I'll hear someone propose something that I think is a reasonable idea. And then people will come back and say, well, you can't do that. They need to be in the city. They need to be downtown. They need to be close to a hospital. They need to be, well, I don't think that's accurate. Like, for instance, if we're talking about a group of people who don't have jobs, then Metro Transit, for them to get to their job, is not really a consideration, is it? But for people who do have jobs, then yes, that is a consideration. So we got to make sure they're somewhere near, at least by a park and ride or whatever the case may be. So you got to consider all of those, the needs of who you're building for, and then determine where you should build what it is you have to build. But I think there needs to be proper facilities built for the very, the most vulnerable, I guess we'll say. So that would be the folks who have other issues beyond being unhoused. That stuff should be approached from a facilities perspective. Okay, so we're going to build whatever this is. We're going to build 500 units. And there is also going to be on-site services for medical attention and nurses and psychiatrists or whatever you need. I don't know. That's not my not my department. I wouldn't determine that.
But whatever support services are necessary.
But what I would say is, but we need to know exactly what those services are, and we need to quantify it, and we need experts in that field to say what that needs to be. How many people do you need? How much support do you need? How many people do we have that need services related to their mental health and or substance abuse problems? And I'm not saying those two people should all be together, right? But that's those folks need entirely different stuff from the people who they have their lives together, other than financially they can't pull it together because
they
times are
literally
tough.
simply don't make enough money.
That's right.
Like
It's
they're
just a
working
math
40 hours a
problem.
week or whatever
right.
it is. They just don't, like, based on the cost of living ballooning here, they don't
That's right.
have enough money to make
And I think
ends meet.
if you're anybody who is working hard and you're committed to, you work full time and you take responsibility for yourself and you go to work every day and you want to pay your bills and you're responsible with your money, those folks should never not have a place to live.
Absolutely.
Never.
Absolutely.
Now, if you're not doing any of those things and you're just looking for a handout, my sympathy ends there, right? So if you're just, well, I don't think I should have to work, but I should have a place to live. I don't like when people say things like housing is a right, that kind of stuff. I don't believe that. I don't think that's the case. That's an ignorant thing to say. Look around the world. The housing's not a right. You got to work for it. You got to look after yourself.
Yeah.
And there are some folks who can't look after themselves, and so we should help those people.
Yes.
But there shouldn't be people taking advantage of that. If you can help yourself, you got to help yourself first, and then we'll help you, push you over the edge to get you back on your feet. But I think there's facilities that need to be built, and I think those types of things should be nowhere near the downtown sector.
Yeah.
I think they should be in industrial parks or somewhere that there is, there are services, and these folks can walk to a convenience store or whatever they need to live. But then there should be other facilities similar to the one you mentioned in Cobequid, the little tiny home facility. And some of that's transitional. That might be like step 2. Okay, these folks aren't. They don't need that same
Level.
stuff.
Yeah.
But they still need deeply affordable. They still can only pay $500 a month to live here or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And then you go the next step again and the next step again. I think there's a range. Again, what are the numbers?
Yeah.
And how many units would we have to build? What would that cost to do? And now let's start talking about the people who develop and build the land, or build the units rather, to get their input. Let's talk to the people who provide the support and the social services to get their input.
Yeah.
And God forbid, let's talk to the people that need the housing and see what they think to a certain degree.
Yeah.
Right? Because again, there's an element there where we need to help people who want to help themselves.
Yeah.
Right? And we definitely can be doing that. We have the money to do it. We spend money, like you said earlier, we spend money on things that are certainly not as important as getting people out of the cold and into a place to live.
Yeah, I
Right?
mean,
what's more important than that, than a roof over your head? Bike lanes aren't more important than that, right? It's
agreed.
Let's just get our priorities straight.
Yeah.
And you can go down a rabbit hole on this. When I get talking on this stuff, I always come back to the same thing, which is ultimately we have a problem with government as a whole. Like you mentioned earlier, the working class, middle class person that gets up in the morning, goes to work, comes home, pays their bills. They're doing the best they can. They're trying. Yep. But they're 3 to 6 months from
they shouldn't be
not having a place to live
the way that they are. I guess I just have a hard time, and I'm not a politician. I'm not an economist, but I have a hard time believing that there's not enough money based on our tax situation here, based on our growing population, based on growing house prices. Like there should be more good things happening with the amount of money. And at the same time, as I say that, I'll follow it up with this. It's really easy for me and you to sit here talking about the problems and having an opinion of what those solutions could look like and so on. And it's not like I don't think that's valid, but I will say I'm pretty happy that I'm not somebody in that kind of a position that has to have the solution.
Sure.
Because I, for one, would never want to do that. Like it's such a complex problem and there's so many barriers. So I've used this analogy with other people and you might think it's funny, but so I bought into the brokerage last year, right? So it's myself and my father, our business partners. So that has this whole range of fun in itself, right? Working with your old man. And we've made, like when I bought in, we kind of just started evaluating everything. We kind of just put everything we're doing out on the table and we started talking about what needs, we just kind of ranked it, what needs to be looked at and what do we think needs to change and why and what needs to happen. And let's start going down through the list. And it was like 30 items long, right?
Okay.
And what I've learned, the harshest reality I've learned since doing that is just how hard it is to make change. And that's at, a brokerage of 85 agents with like 4 or 5 staff, and then just 2 owners who are directly related, right? Who are very much on the same wavelength. And it's like, even if I want to change what kind of coffee's in our break room, it feels like it takes 3 weeks to make that change. And it's just like, so when you're talking about, how are we going to fix the housing crisis? That's a daunting task. That's like the reality. And there's so many aspects to it. Like, for example, you as a home builder, a good home builder, how often are you bringing permits to HRM, right? Or like a proposal to HRM that is not accepted? I'm guessing it's not very often, because you know what you're doing after all these years as a general statement.
Yeah, it would eventually get accepted, because we only bring to them what we know will get accepted. And then it's just a matter of how much time it will take.
And I guess my
But there's
point
other things
is,
we just don't bring to them because we know it won't get accepted.
Yeah. So I guess my point is this, right? If you're looking at, let's say, the top half dozen developers in the city, right? Like, I'm sure if I wrote a list and you wrote a list, it would probably be the exact same people building these like high-rise buildings and stuff, right? And like, quite frankly, I think when you look at those top 4 or 5 or 6, they're quite good at what they do. They're a pretty well-oiled machine. They've been doing it for 3+ decades. They build within the parameter, like they do a good job at molding things into the city and all these things, right? And it's like, so why is it that there's buildings being approved right now that were on the docket 20 years ago? And again, it's like, well, who's to blame? Well, I'll use the corner of Spring Garden Road and Roby as a great example. I'm pretty sure that was like 20 years ago that was first pitched. And it was pitched at like 21 floors. And they didn't want to give them the height. And now here we are 2 decades later, and they're getting like 10 extra floors, and it's being built anyway. Then it's like, well, if some of those developments were approved in a timely manner when they should have been, would we even have the same level of problems that we have right now? And I don't know what that answer is, but my thought would be, well, it can't really be much worse, you know?
No.
Like,
I think to go back to your statement, I agree with you that, yeah, sure, it's easy for people like us, we have homes and we're not worried about being homeless. But I will say, there was a time in my life when I was technically homeless. So when I was in university, there was a period of my life when I lived in another country. Prior to cell phones and texting and the internet. And there was a time when I had to bum around and find somebody who I knew who would let me sleep on their sofa for another month until I was able to leave the country, because when school was over. And I spent many years, all the way through university, with, no more than enough money to go drinking that weekend. Like that's all you had.
They were dollar drinks back then.
That's right. You learn to live within your means, but and I don't come from any money. I grew up in a lower middle class family in rural Nova Scotia, so I understand it. I'm not ignorant to that sensation, what that would be like. I'm not there now, but I didn't get here by accident. I put my head down, and I'm a highly motivated person, and I worked to get here, and I think ultimately what we need is just to provide everybody with that opportunity. That's all you can do. They do with it what they will. But we need to give as many people the opportunity to flourish as possible. But I think you're right. It's a huge, daunting task to think how you would coordinate all of that, and how do you come up with what are the answers. But I think it actually, in my opinion, and this makes it sound like even a more daunting task, but I actually think the only way, we're talking about housing, but you could apply this exact same conversation to healthcare. Equally a disaster.
Maybe
like across
worse.
the country, maybe worse. Because then you're talking like immediate life and death stuff. Right? My wife took our son to the walk-in clinic, or the Cobequid Center last week, the week before, to get an x-ray because we thought he had broke his arm. And 9 hours later, they walked out of there, and ultimately it wasn't broken, but we waited days, and it kept getting worse. We're like, okay, now he can't move his arm, so we should probably 9 hours later. And but the amount of time that the doctor spent, with my son, with my wife, probably would have amounted to somewhere in the neighborhood of less than 20 minutes total, right? And I'm not faulting the doctors and nurses.
No, once you get in, the care itself is great. Like the doctors and the nurses.
But again, it's the same thing. It's just the math. The math isn't working.
What they can with
That's
the situation
right.
that's in front of them.
The math is not working. We keep flooding more people in,
Yeah.
and it just keeps skewing the scales more in that favor. And I think the answer is going to be to these problems. And these two are the two. The other one I would add to that, which is unrelated to what we're talking about, but it falls in the same bucket, which is education in the public school system.
Yep.
So if you take housing, healthcare, in the public school system, the three biggies for the province to be dealing with, I honestly think the only way we fix it is from the bottom up.
Yep.
And it has to be an entirely middle class focused concepts, and it has to stem from that, because it has to be the people who are out there every day. We see it, we see what's going on, we understand what needs to get done, and it has to be in the best interest of the people of Nova Scotia, rather than just, pleasing any particular, whoever might be screaming the loudest at the moment.
Yep.
But it won't be easy, right?
No,
You'll get a lot of
far
pushback from you. But again, it would start with, well, let's first identify and quantify the problem.
Yep.
And then let's identify and quantify the options available to us.
Yep.
And then what your government should then do is present that to the people to vote on. I mean, that's really that's how politics is supposed to work.
Yep.
It's supposed to be, hey, everybody, here are the, election time comes up. It should be, here are the few issues that we all agree are important issues.
Yep.
This party says, here's what we're going to do. And these guys say, here's what we're going to do. And we go, we like what they're going to do. Let's go with them. But we live in this weird time where we don't even identify the issues.
Yeah.
And then we definitely don't say, here's what we're going to do. What they do is say, here's an issue. And these guys go, they're a bunch of dickheads. They're a bunch of liars. And they just argue back and forth.
Yep.
It's like, what team are you on? Instead of, well, hold on a sec. Let's just talk about what the issue is. What is it that you said you're going to do with this?
Yep.
Okay, cool. And what are you guys going to do? And nobody wants to give you that information.
Yeah, I mean,
nobody will quantify that.
I mean, if you look at like the Nova Scotia 5-year housing plan that the Conservatives put forth, I think it was last fall that it came out. I read it a couple times actually. It's like a 30-page PDF document. It's quite detailed, but it's quite detailed with a lot of fluff.
Right.
And I guess, look, don't get me wrong, there's some good things in there for sure. But a lot of it is like, we're going to pave the way to unleash the private sector, and home builders are going to, crush out. We're going to build 40,000 homes in the next 5 years.
Yeah.
And the problem is, it just says we're going to unleash the private sector. But how?
That's right.
What exactly is it that you're going to do that's going to allow you as Stonewater Homes to build double the amount of houses this year that you did last year?
That's right.
And I'm a big believer in accountability, right? So let's put forth some funding, but it's got to have stipulations to it. So in other words, okay, you want to build this building here? We'll give you the 30 floors that you want, even though we should only give you 25. We'll give you the 30. Mm-hmm. But, we're going to give you X number of dollars to go to whatever. Mm-hmm. Okay, great. If you finish it before X date, and it has to be like a reasonable day. I'm not trying to screw somebody over, but if you're telling me this project's going to take 2 years to build, okay, great. If you don't build it in 3 years, then you're going to lose, then you're going to have to pay the fees to whatever, right? Or whatever that might, I don't know, but there needs to be some kind of a metric to put some pressure on to fulfill what they want, right? Mm-hmm. That, to me, that just makes sense. Because it's no different than, if you say to your kid, well, if you mow the lawn, I'll give you $50. And the kid says, well, give it to me first and I'll mow the lawn. What happens when he doesn't mow the lawn? And if there's no recourse, then he's going to do the exact same thing the next time, right? It's kind of a stupid example, but you get my point.
Yeah, but
there's no real metric put on most of these things. It's just there's no accountability. It's we're going to do this, but there's no talk about how, when, why, what.
No, because they don't want to quantify anyone or put any sort of measurable item there.
Yeah.
Because if you can measure it and quantify it, then you can evaluate whether or not they did it.
Yes.
And just recently, I think it was this week or last week, the current government here has decided, I don't know, I'm not using the correct terminology here, but they have these certain mandate letters and things that they issue with respect to different positions and minister positions and so on. They've decided, we're not going to do that anymore.
Yeah.
We're just we'll let you know. We'll let you know how we do. Instead of this document that says, this is what this position is and what they're going to be responsible for, and this is how we're going to measure whether or not they did their job, they've decided we're not going to do that.
Yeah.
So we're actually going the opposite direction.
Yeah.
We're going further away from transparency and accountability
Yeah.
when we need it more than ever.
Yeah.
Right. And I think part of the big reason why we're going away from transparency and accountability is because they know going into it that they don't have the answers. Listen, anything else you want to touch on here? We did a lot of talking about housing, which is ultimately what I was hoping we'd chat on. But anything on on the YouTube channel we forgot to mention? Anything we should?
Yeah, I guess one thing I'm curious is like where do you see it going? Like, what do you think? How do you think 2025 shapes up? And then, like, I don't know, what's your projection for 5 years down the road?
It's a good question.
Hopefully, it's not as negative as what's in my head.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, to be honest with you, Andrew, my projection is it's going to get worse before or if it gets better.
Yep.
Right? There's no reason to think it. Well, put it this way: there's no chance it just turns itself around.
No.
And when we're talking housing, I'm still talking housing, real estate market.
Yep.
The supply and demand, housing prices. There's no reason. If we don't do anything differently at a really large scale, if we don't do anything differently, then there's no reason for it to change.
Yep.
So I think it's going to continue to trend in the wrong direction.
Yep.
But also right now, as mentioned earlier, there's just so much uncertainty with the government at the federal level, what's going to go on with our next election. So until we get on the other side of that, I think some of the things that the Conservatives and Poilievre have put forth, I actually think they're great ideas that will have an immediate measurable impact, like cutting the HST is going to have an immediate impact on the cost of housing. There's no question.
Yep.
I also like what Poilievre is putting forth with respect to the funding and giving the funding to the cities, and what he wants is the bureaucracy out of the way. He wants permits sped up. And it didn't work by just giving the money. We saw that. So I do think, and especially coming from a builder's perspective, sometimes we have to do that. We have to leverage people. You have to sort of dangle the carrot for some, but for other instances, unfortunately, you have to say, if you don't do it this way, you're going to lose something, rather than if you do it this way, you're going to get something.
That accountability aspect of it, or that some kind of a quantifiable metric behind it. Yeah.
Because I think that the two quickest ways we can lower the cost of housing and lower the amount of time it takes to build the housing is to reduce the taxes and fees that we pay, and to drastically reduce the bureaucracy that is in the middle of it, trying to get from this idea of what we're trying to do to the permit to do it. I'd like to be optimistic and think that things happen. We have an election, things turn around. What goes on in the U.S. is positive, and it has a positive impact on our country, and we start doing the things within the country that can help, and then we start doing more things within the province that can help. But I haven't, provincially or at a city level, I haven't heard anybody say anything yet that I think is going to make any difference, unfortunately. Hopefully they will. Hopefully something will happen. But it's a bit naive to think it's just going to change.
Yeah, and I think that's something that's interesting just with everything politically that's been going on is it almost seems to me like a lot of people think that, I think it's general consensus, that Poilievre is our next prime minister, just a matter of when. I think that most people you talk to would agree with that, unless they know something that I don't know. And again, I'm not a politician, but
I think that's a pretty safe bet. I mean, the polls are so far in that favor that barring some kind of craziness, that's what we're looking at.
That's what's coming, right? So, okay, that is what it is. And it's like, I think for some reason, it seems like a lot of people think that when that happens, that everything's just going to turn around.
Yeah. No,
and like, again, it's not the way it works, right? So I think there's some good things going on. I'm optimistic about some things, and I'm pessimistic about some other things. And realistically, I think the supply and demand issue is not going to correct itself. They can lower the immigration to a certain extent. Okay, that's one thing, which will make a difference over time. We're building a lot of units, but not nearly enough. So it's not enough to move the needle as far as I'm concerned. And I think that out of supply or out of whack supply and demand is just going to keep being there. At the end of the day, that you can talk all about everything from any angle. There's a million different things that go into it. But at the end of the day, if there's not enough housing for the people who are buying it, it's likely to only continue to have upward pressure on pricing. I think over the next, call it 5 years, I think we'll see more typical average growth, 5-6% a year, 4 to 6% a year, stuff like that. But that doesn't sound like a lot, but when the average purchase price is almost $600,000, it adds up quick, right?
Sure it does, yeah.
So if you do the math on like, if it grows by 5% year over year, well, in 10 years, it's like $900,000 for an average house in Halifax.
Right.
So the only thing I wonder about a lot, and I've had this conversation with a lot of people, is like, at a certain point, you almost have to think that it might hit the wall. Like at a certain point, people aren't going to be able to afford to live in Halifax. But does that necessarily change the situation, or does it just make some people move out to more rural areas and then more people are coming from Ontario or out west or wherever? Like, I think we're still going to see some interprovincial migration like we've been seeing.
Sure.
So
I think
it's just interesting
that would also
to think
be
about.
like, as we talked about this, the solutions would be, there would be multiple solutions to the housing, the shortness or the lack of housing, I guess we call it. But part of the solution there is going to be, we got to stop focusing on everything being in Halifax. For starters,
Yes.
we have lots of awesome little towns and villages around
There's
Nova
trees
Scotia.
everywhere, man.
Yeah.
You get on the highway, all you can see is trees for
and
hours.
not everybody wants to live in the city anyway, but that's where we run into the problem of, if you would just, especially in HRM, some of the other municipalities are a little better to deal with, but if I'm a home builder here in HRM and Colchester County or Cape Breton County or somebody is more welcoming of development, but I can't drive 3 hours and build houses. I have to, and there aren't a lot of builders in these other communities. And I know that because every week somebody calls looking for a builder in Amherst or New Glasgow or wherever, and do you know anybody? And I actually don't. And there's just not, the development is focused obviously in the city, but we also have to start looking at development being outside of HRM.
And the infrastructure has to be there.
The infrastructure has to be there, but it has to be the right type of housing, the right type of development. It's all there's a big picture approach. But again, I don't think any of this is, I guess this is what I would finish this up by saying, I don't think any of these problems are unsolvable. But we have to have the right information, all of the information, and then we need people in the know who do not have any political motivations. They just want to come up with the right answer and the right solutions that's in the best interest of everybody. We need those people, and there are many of them, to get in on the conversation, whether that's housing or healthcare. I say the same thing when it comes to healthcare. I'm like, oh my God. You'll hear all these stats on what's going on in the healthcare system and who says what, and this political group is saying this and this political group saying that. And I'm thinking, I want to hear from the doctors. I want the doctors and nurses to give me their opinion.
I want them at the podium.
I want to hear what they're saying. But we know why they don't take the podium, because that news won't be good. And it's the same reason why the teachers don't take the podium and tell us what's going on in the school. But our industry is a little bit different because the construction industry and the housing industry is not governed. But we don't work for the government. Teachers and healthcare professionals are government employees. We aren't.
Whole different ballgame.
So we can sit down and pop off like this and say whatever we want. And it's truthful. And there's nothing in it for me to have this or for you to have this conversation. There's nothing we're talking about here today that is going to generate more business for me.
No.
It's the other end of the spectrum. I'm looking at it and saying, look, this is a crisis that is not going away. And it's not going to be solved by politicians. I hate to tell you, it's just not, right? It's going to be solved by builders and developers and people who are in the know, coming up with solutions and working together. And there's so much of it to go around that it's not even that there's any competitiveness to it. It's not like any other builder or developer. It's not like we're competing for who's going to get the next affordable housing development. We'd all be happy to do it. There's far more than enough. We could all shift gears and just become affordable housing builders. If we could actually get the approvals to do it. But that is the problem. So hopefully they'll work on it.
Absolutely.
Thanks for coming in, man. I appreciate you doing this. We'll perhaps do this again sometime.
Appreciate you having me.
And I appreciate the conversation. Best of luck with the real estate business. And of course, if you have any potential new construction folks, feel free to give me a ring. We'll see what we can do.
Absolutely. Appreciate it.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.